My brother has been dead for 6 years, and last October he called my name from the tree line for 4 nights straight. On the fifth night I answered him, and something answered back that was not my brother at all. I want to tell this in order, because the order is the only thing that still makes sense to me. My brother Colton drowned in the Kettle River when I was 22. Nobody's fault. He went under near the rapids and didn't come back up where anyone could reach him, and it took the search team 3 days to find what was left. I did not go back into the woods around that river for a long time. Then last fall a friend of mine talked me into a solo hunting trip about 40 miles north of there, different woods entirely, no connection to Colton at all except that it was woods, and woods are woods to people who didn't grow up scared of them. My friend Marcus set the whole thing up. He'd been going up to that stretch of national forest for 3 years running, said the elk sign up there was better than anywhere else within a day's drive, and he could not understand why I kept putting off saying yes. I told him it wasn't the woods I minded, it was being alone in them, and he laughed and told me being alone was the entire point of the trip. I didn't tell him about Colton. I don't tell most people about Colton. It felt easier to just go, prove something to myself, and come home. I set up a tent about 2 miles off the nearest access road, and a stand of black spruce that thinned out into a shallow bowl of a valley. First 2 nights were normal. Owls, some kind of large animal moving through brush a couple 100 yards off that I never saw, the ordinary sounds you tell yourself are ordinary because the alternative is not sleeping. I'd brought a rifle and I felt fine about my odds against anything that walked on 4 legs. I even texted Marcus on the second night, before I lost signal further in, and told him this wasn't so bad, that I thought I finally understood what he liked about it. I still have that text. I look at it sometimes. The third night, I heard my name. Not shouted. Said, the way Colton used to say it when he wanted my attention without waking our parents, a low flat call with the emphasis on the last syllable instead of the first, which is a strange enough detail that I noticed it even half asleep. I sat up in the tent and told myself it was a bird. There are birds that mimic. I know there are birds that mimic. I went back to sleep because that is what you do when you are alone in the dark and the alternative is standing up. I did not answer that third night. I lay very still and told myself the story about the mimicking bird again, and I almost believed it, because the human brain is good at building you an off-ramp when you need one badly enough. In the morning I walked the perimeter of my camp looking for tracks. I found plenty, deer, something that might have been coyote, and one set I could not place, narrow and long with a gait that put the prints closer together than they should have been for the stride length, like whatever made them had been walking on its toes. I told myself that was a bird too. A big bird. I did not look at those tracks again after that first morning. I did not want to know if more had been added overnight. The fourth night it happened again, closer, and this time it did not stop at my name. It said, "It's cold out here." That was something Colton used to say constantly, a running joke between us because he ran cold and I ran hot and he complained about temperature in every season including August. I lay in that tent for 4 hours without moving, gripping the rifle, listening to something walk a slow circle around my campsite at a distance I could not judge, saying things in a voice pitched almost exactly like my dead brother's, except that underneath it, if I concentrated, there was a wrongness to the vowels, like someone reading phonetically off a page in a language they did not speak. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it was not smart. On the 5th night I did not want to lie there and take it anymore. When the voice came again, closer than it had ever been, maybe 30 yards from the tent flap, saying my name in that same low call, I unzipped the tent and I answered it. I said his name back.
I said, "Colton."
The woods went silent in a way they had not been silent the other nights. No insects. No wind through the spruce. I want you to understand that kind of silence has a texture to it, a pressure, like the air itself is holding still to listen to what you do next. I stood there in the tent opening with my rifle and my headlamp off because I did not want to see anything yet, and I waited. Something laughed. Not a normal laugh.
It started out sounding almost right, almost like a real laugh, and then it kept going about 2 seconds longer than a real laugh would, past the point where a human chest runs out of air, and it dropped in pitch at the end into something closer to a growl than anything a throat should be able to produce.
I have replayed that sound in my head more times than I can count, and I still cannot decide if it was trying to finish imitating a laugh and failed, or if it finished the imitation exactly the way it meant to and the wrongness at the end was the point. I turned my headlamp on. I want to say I saw something and I want to say I did not, and both of those things are sort of true. There was a shape at the tree lean, upright, roughly the right height, and for about 1 full second before it stepped back into the black between the spruce trunks I would have sworn under oath it had my brother's face.
Not a memory of his face. His actual face, present tense, the one that had been 3 days in the Kettle River and was not supposed to exist anywhere except in photographs and my own head.
I did not sleep after that. I sat with my back against a tree with the rifle across my knees until first light, and at first light I broke camp in about 11 minutes and walked the 2 miles out faster than I have ever walked anything in my life. I did not look behind me. People say don't look behind you like it's superstition, like it's a rule from a campfire story, but I am telling you that not looking behind me was the only decision I made correctly that whole week. Because I could hear something keeping pace with me in the brush the entire way to the truck, matching my speed almost exactly, close enough that twice I heard it breathing, and I have never in my life wanted so badly to just keep my eyes on the road ahead of me. I got to the truck. I got in. I drove 40 minutes before I pulled over and was sick on the shoulder of the highway. I called Marcus from a gas station 2 hours later, hand still shaking too hard to hold the pump steady, and told him I'd cut the trip short, food poisoning, something I ate. He asked if I was okay to drive and I said yes, which was a lie, because for most of that drive home I kept checking my mirrors for a shape that was never actually there, and twice I pulled onto the shoulder convinced I'd seen someone standing at the tree lean along the highway, just standing, watching the cars go by. Both times there was nothing there when I looked again. I am aware of how that sounds. I was aware of it then too, and it did not make the checking stop. Here's the part one haven't told anyone, not my wife, not the friend who talked me into the trip.
2 weeks after I got home, my phone rang at 2 a.m. from a number with no name attached, no caller ID at all, and when I picked it up and said hello, there was about 4 seconds of static, and then a voice said it's cold out here and hung up.
I changed my number. I have not been back to those woods and I do not intend to. But every so often, maybe once a month, I will be somewhere ordinary, a grocery store, a gas station, and for just a second I will hear someone behind me say my name with the emphasis on the wrong syllable, and when I turn around there is never anyone there who could have said it. I used to think grief was the thing that followed you home from the woods. I am not so sure anymore that it was grief at all, and I am not so sure it stayed behind. I walked the same quarter-mile of trail for 11 hours and counted 43 of my own boot prints in the mud before I noticed that none of them were mine.
By the time I understood what was leaving them, it was already walking about 20 feet behind me, matching me step for step.
I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. I was doing a solo overnight in a state forest I'd hiked a dozen times before, nothing remote, a loop trail that a lot of families do in an afternoon. I'd done this exact loop myself, twice, so I wasn't worried about navigation. I had a paper map as backup, a phone with the trail loaded offline, and I left my car at the trailhead around 10 in the morning, planning to camp at a site about 6 miles in and come back out the next day. I want to say I had a bad feeling before any of it started, some hair on the neck warning that a story like this is supposed to have, but I didn't. It was a good morning. Cool, clear, the kind of light through the canopy that makes you understand why people bother with this hobby at all. I passed 2 other groups of hikers in the first hour, said good morning to both, and I remember thinking, with something close to smugness, that this was exactly the low-stakes trip I needed after a bad stretch at work. I want that detail on record because it makes what came after feel worse in hindsight, how ordinary the morning was, how little the woods gave away. The first sign something was wrong came around 1 in the afternoon. I'd been walking for 3 hours, at a pace that should have put me close to the campsite, and I came around a bend and recognized a specific fallen log I had already passed. Not a similar log. That log, with the same shelf fungus growing off the north side, the same scorch mark near the root ball from some old lightning strike. I checked my phone. According to the GPS, I was still moving forward along the trail, still making progress, 6 miles becoming 5 becoming 4. But my eyes kept finding things I'd already seen. I told myself trails loop back on themselves sometimes, switchbacks, that the geography just repeats. I kept walking. 40 minutes later I passed the log again. That's when I started counting. I'm not sure why counting felt like the right response, except that it was something to do with my hands and my attention besides panic, and counting things has always calmed me down. I looked for my own boot prints in the softer mud sections of the trail, the ones I knew I'd left because I recognized the tread pattern of my own boots, distinct nicks in the rubber I'd have picked out anywhere. I counted them going past the log. Once, twice, 3 times. By 3 I stopped telling myself it was switchbacks. I want to explain what it's like to realize you are lost in a place you have already hiked, because it is a specific kind of fear that doesn't look like the fear in movies. There's no music. Nothing chases you. You just start to understand, slowly, that the relationship between your feet and the ground has stopped meaning what you always assumed it meant, that forward is not taking you anywhere, and that the woods around you, which look completely unremarkable, spruce and fern and the ordinary brown floor of a forest, have become something closer to a room you are locked inside of, dressed up to look bigger than it is. Around 4 in the afternoon, with maybe 3 hours of daylight left, I made the decision that I still believe was the right one even though it did not work. I left the trail entirely. If the trail was looping, I reasoned, then walking in a straight line perpendicular to it, using my phone's compass, should eventually take me out of whatever was happening, even if it meant bushwhacking through undergrowth for a while. I picked a heading and I walked it as straight as I could manage for 45 minutes.
I came out at the fallen log.
I sat down on that log for a long time after that, because I did not have a next plan. It was during that sitting that I noticed the prints properly for the first time, really looked at them instead of just registering that I was going in circles. There were far more than my own 3 passes could account for. Dozens, overlapping, some fresh enough that the mud hadn't dried at the edges, some old enough to be half filled with leaf litter, and they were not all the same tread. Some were boots like mine. Some were narrower, older looking, maybe a woman's hiking shoe.
There was one set, small, that I did not want to think about the size of, and I made myself stop looking before I could decide for certain what had made them.
I want to tell you I kept my composure. I did not. I got up off that log and I ran, no direction in mind, just away, and I ran until I physically could not anymore, which turned out to be about 4 minutes, because panic burns fast when you've already been hiking for hours. I stopped in a stand of birch I did not recognize, which felt at the time like the best news I'd had all day, someplace new, someplace the trail hadn't already shown me. That's when I heard it behind me.
Footsteps on dry leaves at a walking pace, not running, not hurried, matching a rhythm I only recognized because it was so familiar. It was my own gait.
I know how I walk. Everyone has a rhythm to their own steps that you don't consciously notice until you hear it coming from somewhere it shouldn't be. I turned around and there was nothing there, just birch trunks and the low evening light coming through sideways, but the steps did not stop when I turned.
They stopped exactly 2 seconds after I turned, like whatever was making them needed that long to also stop moving, the way a reflection needs a beat to catch up in a bad mirror.
I did not run again. Some instinct told me running was the wrong move, that whatever this was matched pace rather than closed distance, and closing distance was the thing to avoid giving it a reason to do. I walked, deliberately, calmly as I could fake it, back toward where I thought the trail had to be, and the footsteps behind me kept pace at that same 20-foot distance the entire way, never closer, never farther. For what my watch told me was almost 2 hours, until the light went fully dark and I lost the ability to see anything except the small cone from my headlamp. I found the trail again by accident, my boot catching the raised edge of it in the dark, and once I was on it, on packed earth instead of forest floor, the footsteps behind me stopped. I don't know why. I have a theory that it's not a good one, which is that whatever it was could only really move where the ground had already been disturbed by feet, that it needed prints to follow the way you'd need a scent, and the trail itself, packed by thousands of boots over years, was too crowded with old signatures for it to isolate mine anymore. I walked out that night instead of camping, which took another 4 hours in full dark, and somewhere in there I stopped seeing the fallen log again, stopped recognizing anything. And the trail behaved like a trail is supposed to behave, taking me steadily toward the trailhead and my car. Somewhere in that last stretch I passed a wooden trail marker post I did not remember from the way in, though I'd swear I'd read every marker on that loop before. Carved into the wood, low down near the base where you'd only see it if you were looking down at your own feet, were tally marks.
Dozens of them, in groups of 5, scratched deep enough to have withered gray with age, and one fresh set of 4 with no 5th line closing the group yet.
I did not stop to add anything to that count, and I did not look back at it either. I have wondered since whether it would have mattered which one of us finished it. I got there a little after midnight. There was one other car in the lot, which I hadn't noticed on my way in, an old sedan with a film of pollen on the windshield thick enough to suggest it had been sitting there for weeks, maybe longer, and I did not stop to look closer at it. I got in my own car and drove. I looked up that trail online when I got home, hoping for some forum post, some old article, anything that would tell me I wasn't the only one. I found exactly one thing. A missing person flyer from 4 years earlier, a hiker who'd gone in on that same loop for what was supposed to be an easy overnight and never came back out. The photo was blurry, the kind of thing pulled off a family Facebook page, but I keep coming back to the shoe brand mentioned in the description of what she'd been last seen wearing, because it matches, as closely as I can tell from memory, the narrower set of prints I saw circling that log, over and over, dozens of times, going nowhere at all. We found our friend Dana sitting cross-legged outside the cabin, smiling, about 12 hours after she'd wandered off to pee in the woods. She never blinked again for the rest of the trip, not once, not one single time, and none of us said a word about it to each other until we were all safely back home. There were 4 of us on that trip. Me, Dana, and a couple, Priya and Sam, who'd been together since college and were the ones who actually knew about the cabin, an old hunting cabin on land that belonged to Sam's family. Way up in a stretch of forest that didn't show up clearly on any map app, the kind of place you navigate to with directions someone wrote down for you by hand. 3 hours of paved road and then another 40 minutes of logging track that ate the bottom out of Sam's truck twice. We were going up for a long weekend, no cell signal, no real plan beyond drinking and hiking and getting away from our lives for a few days. Sam told us on the drive up, half joking the way you do when you want to plant a seed without owning it, that his uncle stopped using the cabin years back and wouldn't say exactly why. Just muttered something once at a family dinner about how the woods up there got greedy in the fall. We all laughed about it at the time. It was the kind of thing you laugh about at 3 in the afternoon with the windows down and a cooler in the truck bed, before you've spent a night actually surrounded by that particular dark. The kind with no light pollution at all, where your eyes never fully adjust because there's nothing for them to adjust to. The cabin itself was fine, honestly kind of perfect. One big room with a loft, a wood stove, an outhouse about 30 yards off through the trees because there was no plumbing. We got in Friday afternoon, had a good first night, nothing strange about any of it. Saturday we hiked most of the day, came back, ate, drank a little too much, and around 11 at night Dana got up to use the outhouse and didn't come back. I want to mention one thing from earlier that night, because at the time none of us thought it meant anything. Around 10, before Dana ever got up, we'd all gone quiet for a minute listening to what Sam called an owl, off in the trees somewhere past the outhouse. A low warbling call that rose and fell in a pattern that didn't quite sound like any bird call I'd heard before, more like someone trying to hum a song they'd only heard once. Dana was the one who said it was pretty. She said it twice, actually, like she wanted to make sure we'd heard her say it. We didn't panic right away. 15 minutes, we assumed she'd stop to look at stars, she did stuff like that. 20 minutes, Sam went to check the outhouse and it was empty, and that's when the night changed shape for all of us. We spent the next several hours doing everything you're supposed to do, calling her name in a grid pattern out from the cabin, using every flashlight we had, and finding absolutely nothing, no sign, no dropped phone, no footprint we could follow past the first 20 feet of soft ground behind the outhouse. Around 3 in the morning Priya wanted to drive out for help and Sam refused to leave, said the truck was needed for search sweeps along the logging road, and the two of them had the closest thing to a real fight I ever saw between them, right there in the dark, both of them scared out of their minds and taking it out on each other because there was nothing else to point it at. I want to tell this next part exactly the way it happened, because I've gone over it in my head so many times since that I'm genuinely not sure anymore which details are memory and which ones I've added without meaning to.
At around 6 in the morning, first gray light, I walked out past the outhouse one more time on my own, and there she was. Sitting cross-legged in the wet ferns, facing the cabin, completely still, wearing the same clothes from the night before, not a scratch on her, not dirty, not cold-looking despite having apparently been outside all night in October. She was smiling. Not a scared smile, not a relieved smile. Just a smile, held steady, the way you'd hold a pose for a photograph that was taking an unusually long time to snap.
I called the others and we all half carried her back inside, and the whole time, walking, being carried, sitting her down by the stove, that smile did not move and her eyes did not move either, not once, and I realized after about 10 minutes of sitting near her that I had not seen her blink.
Not a slow blink, not a fast one. Nothing. Her eyes stayed open, dry-looking, fixed somewhere past whoever was in front of her, and when Priya waved a hand in front of her face there was no reaction at all, no flinch, no tracking, nothing.
She could still function, mostly. That's the part that made it worse instead of better. She'd eat if you put food near her hand. She'd walk if you led her by the arm.
Once, when Sam asked her directly what happened, she said, in a voice that was hers but flattened somehow, like a recording played back slightly wrong, "I went to see what was singing."
That was all she said the entire rest of the trip.
"I went to see what was singing."
We asked her a dozen different ways, gentler, more direct, and she either didn't answer or repeated the same 6 words in exactly the same flat tone, like a track looping. We packed up and left within the hour, nobody willing to say out loud what we were all thinking, which was that whatever had happened to her in those woods might still be close enough to happen to the rest of us if we stayed.
The drive out was silent except for Dana, who sat in the middle of the back seat between me and Bria, upright, hands in her lap, eyes open the entire 3.5 hours. And somewhere around the 2-hour mark I made myself look directly at her for a long stretch, testing something I didn't want to admit I was testing, and I counted past 4 full minutes without a single blink before I made myself look away instead of finishing the count.
We took her straight to an emergency room. The doctors who saw her used words like dissociative, catatonic adjacent, possible exposure, and dehydration, and kept her overnight for observation. By the next morning, she was blinking again. Normal, ordinary blinking, the kind you don't ever think about because you've never had a reason to count somebody else's. She had no memory of the night at all, none, not the outhouse, not the ferns, not the 6 words she'd repeated to us over and over. The official version, the one on her discharge paperwork, was some combination of a fall, mild hypothermia, and disorientation. Nobody who was actually there that weekend believes that's what it was, but none of us have ever managed to say out loud what we do believe instead, because saying it would mean agreeing it was real, and I don't think any of us wants that agreement on the record between us. Here's the thing I still haven't told Priya or Sam, 3 years on. About a week after we got back, alone in my apartment, working late with a podcast on in the background for noise, I caught myself, out of nowhere, going a long time without blinking. I don't know how long.
I only noticed because my eyes had started to burn and water on their own, the body's automatic correction for something that should be automatic in the first place, and when I did finally blink, deliberately, forcing it, I had this brief, awful conviction that I'd been sitting very still with a smile on my face that I had not put there myself.
I checked in a dark phone screen and there was nothing wrong with my reflection, ordinary tired face, no smile at all. I've told myself 100 times it was nothing, 3 days of bad sleep and residual fear from the worst weekend of my life catching up with my nervous system.
But I still catch myself sometimes, mid-afternoon, at my desk, realizing my eyes have gone dry and my jaw feels strange, like it's been arranged into an expression I didn't choose, and I have never once been able to remember the moment right before I noticed. Dana still won't go back to that stretch of woods, won't even look at photos of it, and when I asked her once, gently, if anything about that night had ever come back to her, even in fragments, even in dreams, she just said no, and smiled at me in a way that made me wish I hadn't asked.